My son didn't speak to me for 20 years, but when he heard I'd won the lottery, he invited me to an expensive dinner to try and con his poor mother out of her winnings. He didn't know that was just my hobby money. I let him finish his condescending pitch before I revealed my secret, 7 million fortune, my new will leaving him nothing, and the first-class, round-the-world cruise I was about to take. Before I begin, I just want to say, thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. My name is Martha May Williams. For 40 years, I was the head librarian at the West Philadelphia Regional Library. My life was a quiet, ordered universe of Dewey Decimal Systems, the gentle rustle of turning pages, and the sacred, hushed duty of connecting people with stories. At 68, my life is much the same, only the library is now my own cozy, book-filled row house, and the only patrons are me and my cat Baldwin. I live a simple life. I take the bus. I shop at the corner market. I live on my librarian's pension and my late husband's social security. To the outside world, and most pointedly to my son, Derek, I am a woman of modest means and even more modest ambitions, a relic of a working-class past he has spent his entire adult life trying to outrun. This life is a lie. A quiet, meticulously maintained 20-year-long lie. 20 years ago, my son, my only child, cut me out of his life. He had just married a woman from a wealthy family and made partner at his high-powered law firm. His mother, the librarian from West Philly, was no longer a fit for the grand, new narrative he was writing for himself. The silence he imposed was a judgment, a verdict on my life, my worth. It was a wound so profound I thought it might never heal. But in that vast, echoing silence, I discovered something. I was a librarian. I was a researcher. My entire life had been dedicated to the study of patterns, to the acquisition and analysis of information. And I realized that the stock market, that great, intimidating beast that so terrified most people, was nothing more than another kind of library. It was a collection of stories, of patterns, of histories. And I, a master of the archives, was uniquely qualified to read it. With a small inheritance my own mother had left me and the modest savings my husband and I had accumulated, I began my secret education. I did not gamble. I researched. I spent my lonely evenings not grieving, but studying. I read financial reports with the same intensity I had once reserved for Faulkner. I tracked market trends with the focus of a historian tracing a migration pattern. I learned the language of bulls and bears, of puts and calls, of long-term growth and short-term volatility. And I was good at it. Frighteningly good. My librarian's mind, trained to see the connections others missed, saw the narrative arcs in the market. I bought tech stocks when they were still a whisper, invested in real estate when the city was still a risk. I was patient. I was disciplined. And over 20 years of quiet, obsessive, and completely secret work, I turned my small nest egg into a fortune. A silent, digital ledger that now read just north of $7 million. My son had cast me out of his life because he thought I was a failure. He had no idea his simple mother was a financial titan, a quiet queen ruling a vast and invisible empire from a row house in West Philadelphia. Derek's world was the polar opposite of mine. It was a world of gleaming surfaces, of performative success, of a constant, anxious striving for more. He was a partner at one of Center City's most prestigious and predominantly white law firms. He lived with his wife, Kimberly, in a sprawling, sterile mansion in a gated community on the main line. Their life was a carefully curated exhibition of wealth, a collection of expensive, joyless artifacts, the German cars, the country club memberships, the charity galas where they smiled for the society pages. I knew this world only through the occasional, painful glimpses I got online, through the alumni magazines and news articles that would sometimes cross my desk at the library before I retired. I saw my son, my little boy who had once loved the stories I read to him, transformed into this stranger, this handsome, successful man in a tailored suit, his face a mask of confident, unshakable arrogance. But I, the researcher, knew how to look at the subtext. And I knew that Derek's arrogance was a fragile facade, a thin veneer over a deep and profound insecurity. He was a man who was terrified of his own past. He was ashamed of the West Philly row house he grew up in, ashamed of his father's job as a union carpenter, and most of all, ashamed of his mother, the librarian. I was the living embodiment of the working-class roots he had tried so desperately to sever. My very existence was a threat to the carefully constructed narrative of his own effortless ascent. His wife, Kimberly, was the primary architect of this shame. She came from a family of old, quiet money, and she viewed me with a kind of anthropological curiosity, as if I were a quaint, primitive specimen from a forgotten tribe. In the early years of their marriage, before the Great Silence, she would visit my home and her eyes would sweep over my comfortable, book-filled rooms with a look of pitying contempt. "It's so cozy, Martha," she would say, the word cozy, wielded like a weapon, a synonym for small and unimpressive. She was the one who had encouraged the estrangement. I knew this. She had seen me as a social liability, a drag on their upward trajectory. She had convinced Derek that in order to truly belong in their new, rarefied world, he had to cut the cord to his old one. And he, in his weakness, in his desperate, clawing need to be accepted by her and her family, had agreed. What I did not know, what I would only learn later, was that the facade was beginning to crack. Derek, in an attempt to play in the same financial leagues as Kimberly's family, had made a series of disastrous private investments in a high-risk real estate venture. He had been trying to build his own fortune, to prove that he was more than just a high-paid employee, that he was a player in his own right. And he had failed. Catastrophically. He was, as he prepared to make his grand, magnanimous return into my life, a man on the brink of financial ruin. The mansion, the cars, the country club membership, it was all a house of cards, and a strong wind was beginning to blow. He was desperate. And his desperation was about to lead him right back to the one person he had spent 20 years trying to forget. The trap was sprung not with a complex, strategic maneuver, but with a simple, almost whimsical act of chance. One Tuesday afternoon, I was at the corner market, picking up milk and cat food, when I saw the sign for the Powerball lottery. The jackpot was enormous, a ridiculous, life-altering sum. On a pure, uncharacteristic whim, a small, rebellious impulse against my own disciplined, sensible nature, I bought a ticket. I let the machine pick the numbers. I tucked the small slip of paper into my wallet, next to my library card, and promptly forgot all about it. A week later, I was reading the morning paper when I saw a small article in the local news section. Local librarian wins, big in Powerball. My heart gave a small, curious lurch. I read the article. The grand prize winner had been in California. But, the article noted, a single ticket sold in Philadelphia had matched 5 of the 6 numbers, winning the second-tier prize. The prize was $1 million. I put down the paper, a slow, strange smile spreading across my face. I walked to my handbag, retrieved my wallet, and pulled out the forgotten lottery ticket. I compared the numbers on the slip to the ones in the paper. They matched. All 5 of them. My first reaction was not one of elation. It was not the giddy, life-changing shock that most people would feel. To a woman who was secretly managing a $7 million portfolio, a single $1 million, while certainly a lovely sum, was not a transformative event. My first reaction was one of pure, cold, strategic clarity. This was it. This was the perfect, God-given opportunity. My great wealth was a secret. It was an invisible, silent power. But its very secrecy was its weakness. I could not use it to expose my son's character without revealing my own long-term deception. But this was different. A lottery win was public record. It was a clean, simple, and easily understood event. It was a fortune that was, in the grand scheme of my own finances, almost insignificant. But to Derek, a man I knew was secretly drowning in debt, $1 million would seem like a life raft. A life raft captained by a simple, naive woman who would have no idea how to navigate it. This was the bait. The perfect, irresistible bait. I called the State Lottery Commission. I made an appointment. I went through the formal, bureaucratic process of claiming my prize. I had to agree to the standard publicity, the photograph, the brief, human interest story. I played the part of the shocked, grateful, and slightly overwhelmed, retired librarian to perfection. The story ran in the paper and on the local news the following week. There I was, Martha May Williams, a smiling, gray-haired woman in a simple cardigan, holding a giant, novelty check for $1 million. The story was charming. It was the kind of feel-good news that people love. A humble, hard-working public servant gets a lucky break. I knew that photo, that story, would find its way to my son. It was not a question of if, but when. I had cast the line into the water. And I knew, with the absolute certainty of a master investor who has just taken a calculated risk, that the fish was about to bite. The call came on a Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after the story about my lottery win had been published. I was in my living room, listening to a Mahalia Jackson record, the rich, powerful notes of her voice filling the quiet house. The phone rang, a shrill, jarring interruption. I looked at the caller ID, and my heart, despite my careful preparation, gave a painful, complicated lurch. It was Derek. For 20 years, that phone had been silent. For 20 years, I had stared at it, especially on birthdays and holidays, hoping, praying for a call that never came. And now, here it was. The prodigal son was calling home. Not because of love, not because of remorse, but because of a lottery ticket. I let it ring, once, twice, 3 times, a small, petty act of resistance. Then, I took a deep breath, composed myself, and answered. "Hello?" I said, my voice a perfect imitation of a slightly confused, elderly woman. There was a pause on the other end of the line, as if he were surprised that I had answered. Then his voice, a voice I had not heard in 2 decades, a voice that was at once achingly familiar and chillingly foreign. "Mom?" he said. The word was hesitant, tentative, an exploratory probe into the vast, silent territory of our estrangement. "Yes?" I replied, my own voice quiet, neutral. I would give him nothing. I would make him work for it. "Mom, it's Derek," he said, as if I might not recognize the voice of my own child. "I know who it is," I said. Another pause, this one longer, more awkward. He was clearly flustered. This was not going according to his script. He had expected tears, recriminations, a flood of maternal emotion that he could then skillfully manage. He was not prepared for this calm, quiet, and utterly unreadable wall. "Look, Mom," he began again, his voice now shifting, adopting a tone of deep, rehearsed sincerity. I know it's been a long time. Too long. And there's no excuse for it. I was young. I was stupid. I was an idiot. And I have regretted it every single day for the past 20 years. The lies were so smooth, so practiced. They were almost beautiful in their audacity. "I saw the news, Mom," he continued, his voice now thick with a manufactured emotion. "I saw your picture in the paper. The lottery. And my first thought was just, thank God. Thank God she's okay. Thank God she'll be taken care of." It was a brilliant performance. He was framing his return not as an act of greed, but as an act of filial concern, his fears for my financial well-being finally assuaged by my lucky windfall. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he said, his voice now a near whisper of contrition. "For everything. For the lost time. I would like to make it right. I would like to see you. I would like for you to meet Kimberly again, to see your grandchildren." He had grandchildren I had never met, a fact he now deployed as a tool of emotional leverage. "I want to take you to dinner," he said, the words a rush now, the grand finale of his speech. "A real celebration. For your win. For us. A new beginning." I was silent for a long moment, letting his performance hang in the air. I, the librarian, the archivist of my own pain, was cross-referencing his words with 20 years of silence, of neglect, of profound and total indifference. And the data did not match, but I would play my part. "All right, Derek," I said, my voice quiet, as if I were considering his offer with a great and solemn weight. I think I would like that." I heard a small, almost imperceptible sigh of relief on his end of the line. The fish had taken the bait. "Wonderful, Mom," he said, his voice now booming with a false, hearty cheer. "It's a date. We'll make it special. A real treat. You deserve it." We made the arrangements. He would take me to the most exclusive, most expensive restaurant in the city. Of course he would. The stage had to be grand for the final act of his play. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up the phone. I sat in the quiet of my living room, the sound of Mahalia Jackson's voice now a mournful, powerful counterpoint to the ugliness of the conversation. The game had officially begun, and I knew, with a cold, hard, and deeply sorrowful certainty, that I was going to win. Derek chose Bec-Finn, a name that, in the world of Philadelphia fine dining, was not just a restaurant, but a statement. It was a temple of haute cuisine in Rittenhouse Square, a place of hushed tones, white tablecloths, and a wine list that read like a king's ransom. It was a place designed to communicate power, wealth, and an effortless, inherited sophistication. It was, in short, the perfect stage for the drama he intended to direct. His choice was a deliberate, strategic act of intimidation. He was summoning me from my quiet, working-class world of West Philadelphia and bringing me into his. He was setting the scene in a place where he would be comfortable, and I, he assumed, would be a fish out of water, a simple, unsophisticated woman overwhelmed by the opulence, and therefore more pliable, more easily managed. When he told me the name of the restaurant over the phone, I had played my part to perfection. "Oh my," I had said, my voice a perfect imitation of a flustered, working-class woman. "That sounds very fancy, Derek. Are you sure? I don't have anything to wear for a place like that." "Don't you worry about a thing, Mom," he had replied, his voice dripping with a condescending, magnanimous charm. "Just wear your Sunday best. It's my treat. You deserve to see how the other half lives." The arrogance of that last line was breathtaking. He was so blinded by his own narrative that he had no idea I had probably spent more on a single stock trade that morning than he would be spending on this entire, performative dinner. After I hung up with him, I made my second call. The call to my own co-conspirator, my general, my best friend of 50 years, Ellie Vance. Ellie was a retired schoolteacher, a woman whose sharp, cynical wit was the perfect antidote to my own quiet, observational nature. She was the only person on the planet who knew the full truth of my financial life. She had been my sounding board, my confidant, and my fiercest cheerleader throughout my 20-year journey of secret wealth accumulation. She had also been the most vocal critic of my son's behavior. "So, the prodigal son has returned to slaughter the fatted calf," she'd said, her voice a low, dangerous growl, after I had recounted the conversation. "And he's taking you to Bec-Finn? The nerve of that boy. He's going to try and dazzle you with your own money." "It's not my money, Ellie," I had replied. "It's the lottery's money. That's the beauty of it. It's a distinction without a difference," she'd snorted. "So, what's the plan, General? Are you going to let him make his pitch?" "Though, I am going to let him build the most beautiful, most elaborate, most arrogant trap for himself," I had said. "And then I am going to watch him step in it, with both of his expensive, Italian leather-clad feet." Ellie had cackled with a deep, satisfying glee. "Oh, this is going to be better than Shakespeare," she'd said. "What are you going to wear?" That was the question. I knew that my appearance at this dinner was a critical part of the strategy. I had to look the part that Derek had cast me in, the simple, slightly overwhelmed mother from the old neighborhood. I spent the next few days preparing my costume. I did not go to a high-end boutique. I went to a perfectly respectable, but decidedly middle-class, department store. I bought a simple, tasteful, but utterly unremarkable navy blue dress. I chose a pair of sensible, low-heeled shoes. I would wear my simple, single strand of pearls, a gift from my late husband. My performance would be a masterpiece of subtlety. I would be polite. I would be grateful. I would be just slightly out of my depth. I would be everything he expected me to be. I would be the perfect, unsuspecting lamb, walking calmly and obediently to the slaughter. He would have no idea that I was, in fact, the butcher, and that the only thing on the menu that night was his own, monumental, and long overdue serving of humble pie. The restaurant was even more opulent than I had remembered. It was a world of crystal chandeliers, hushed carpets, and an army of silent, black-clad waiters who moved with the grace of ballet dancers. I arrived via a simple taxi, a deliberate choice, and was met at the door by Derek, who was already there, holding court with the maitre d'. He was dressed in a suit that I knew, from my own quiet research into the world of luxury goods, had cost at least $5,000. He greeted me with a grand, theatrical hug, a gesture of filial devotion for the benefit of the restaurant staff. "Mom, you made it," he boomed, his voice a little too loud. "You look wonderful." He led me to a prime table in the center of the room. Kimberly, his wife, was already there, a vision of cool, blonde perfection in a dress that looked like it was spun from liquid gold. She stood to give me a perfunctory air kiss, her eyes sweeping over my simple navy dress with a look of barely concealed pity. "Martha," she said, her voice a silken purr. "It is so good to see you. We have missed you so much." The lies began immediately, and they did not stop for the next 2 hours. The dinner was a relentless, 3-act performance of their own magnanimity and my supposed good fortune. Act 1 was the performance of affection. They showered me with a level of attention I had not received from them in 20 years. They asked about my health, about my neighbors, about my cat. The questions were superficial, the interest feigned, but the performance was flawless. They were playing the part of the loving, concerned children, finally reunited with their long-lost mother. Act 2 was the performance of wealth. The entire dinner was a carefully curated exhibition of their own success and sophistication. Derek ordered the most expensive bottle of champagne on the wine list, making a great show of discussing its vintage with the sommelier. Kimberly talked at length about their recent trip to Aspen, about the new wing they were adding to their house, about the difficulties of finding a good au pair. Every word, every gesture, was designed to impress upon me the vast, glittering world I was now, through my own dumb luck, being allowed to enter. They treated me like a tourist, a visitor from a foreign land. "Now, Mom, you have to try the foie gras," Derek would insist. "It's a delicacy, very rich." As if I, a woman who had spent a lifetime reading, had never heard of foie gras. Act 3 was the performance of condescension. This was the most painful, and most revealing, part of the evening. They began to subtly, and then not so subtly, probe about the lottery money. Their questions were wrapped in the language of concern, but their true intent was as clear as the crystal glasses on the table. $1 million is a lot of money, Mother," Kimberly said, her expression one of grave seriousness. "It can be very overwhelming. There are so many things to consider. Taxes, investments, people coming out of the woodwork asking for handouts." "She's right, Mom," Derek chimed in, leaning forward, his voice now a low, confidential murmur. "You are going to be a target. You're a sweet, trusting person. You don't know this world. It can be a shark tank." I played my part. I looked overwhelmed. I looked naive. I looked like the simple, trusting woman they believed me to be. "Oh, my," I said, my voice a flutter of manufactured anxiety. "I hadn't even thought of all that. It is all so complicated." Their faces, in that moment, were a perfect mirror of each other. They exchanged a small, almost imperceptible glance, a look of pure, triumphant satisfaction. They had me. The hook was set. The fish was on the line. They believed they were being so clever, so subtle. They had no idea that I was not the fish. I was the fisherman, and they were swimming, with a joyful, greedy, and completely oblivious confidence, right into my net. After the main courses had been cleared away, after the last, performative bite of truffle-laced risotto had been consumed, Derek signaled to the waiter to refill our champagne glasses. He then leaned back in his chair, a look of deep, paternal seriousness on his face. The time for small talk was over. The time for the pitch had arrived. "Mom," he began, his voice the smooth, confident purr of a lawyer about to deliver his closing argument to a jury he knows he has already won over. "I am so incredibly proud of you. Not just for this wonderful stroke of luck, but for everything. You worked hard your whole life. You raised me. You deserve this. You deserve to be secure, to be happy, to have not a single worry in the world for the rest of your days. It was a beautiful speech, full of all the right words. It was also a complete and utter fabrication, a preamble designed to soften me up for the kill. He took a sip of his champagne, his eyes never leaving my face. But as we were saying, he continued, his tone shifting from sentimental to serious, sudden wealth, especially for people who aren't used to it, can be a curse as much as it is a blessing. It brings with it a host of complexities, of dangers, that you simply aren't equipped to handle. He began to list these dangers, his voice a low, ominous litany. He spoke of predatory financial advisors who would try to churn my account for commissions. He spoke of complex tax laws and estate planning vehicles that were beyond the comprehension of a layperson. He spoke of the risk of inflation, of market volatility, of the 1,000 different ways a fool and her money are soon parted. He was painting a picture of a terrifying, hostile financial world, a world full of sharks and pitfalls, a world in which a simple, retired librarian would be hopelessly, tragically lost. And he, of course, was positioning himself as my only hope, my knight in shining armor, the one person who could guide me safely through this treacherous landscape. "You have spent your life in a world of books, Mom," he said, his voice now dripping with a condescending, affectionate pity. "A world of stories and ideas, a beautiful world. But it is not this world. This world is a jungle. And you need a guide. You need someone who speaks the language, who knows the terrain." He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his expression one of deep, earnest sincerity. "I have spent the last 20 years of my life mastering this world," he said. "My firm, we manage the estates of some of the wealthiest families in this city. We are experts in wealth preservation, in legacy building. We know how to make money work for you, how to protect it, how to make it grow." He was so convincing, so confident in his own performance, that for a fleeting moment, I almost believed him myself. He had completely forgotten that he was speaking to a woman who had, through her own skill and discipline, built a fortune 7 times larger than the one he was so condescendingly offering to protect. He was a minnow, lecturing a blue whale on the art of swimming. Having established the terrifying dangers of the financial world and his own unique qualifications as my savior, Derek then moved to the final, transactional part of his pitch, the offer itself. He reached into the inside pocket of his expensive suit jacket and pulled out a slim, leather-bound folder. He slid it across the table to me. "I took the liberty," he said, his voice a low, confidential murmur, "of having my firm's estate planning team draw up a preliminary proposal. Just a suggestion, of course, a way for us to start the conversation." I opened the folder. Inside was a single, beautifully printed document on thick, creamy paper. It was titled, "The Martha May Williams Family Trust, a Proposal." The proposal was as audacious as it was insulting. It suggested that I take my $1 million lottery winnings and place the entire sum into a new, irrevocable trust. The trust would be managed by his law firm, and the sole trustee, the person with absolute and total control over all investment decisions, would be him, Derek Williams. The document went on to detail the benefits of this arrangement. I would be provided with a generous monthly stipend, a figure that was, I noted with a grim, internal smile, about half of what I was currently earning in dividends alone from my secret portfolio. This stipend would be guaranteed for life, a phrase designed to sound comforting to a poor, insecure old woman. The rest of the money, the vast bulk of the $1 million, would be invested for long-term growth by Derek. The goal, the proposal stated, was to preserve and grow the family's legacy for future generations, which was to say, for him and his children. It was a legal and financial cage, presented as a golden parachute. He was offering to put me on an allowance, to take my newfound fortune and make it his own, all under the guise of protecting me from myself. He let me read the document, watching my face for a reaction. I played my part. I looked confused. I looked overwhelmed. I looked like a simple woman trying to decipher a foreign language. "So," I said, looking up from the paper, my voice a perfect imitation of naive uncertainty, You would be in charge of the money?" "Exactly, Mom," he said, his voice soothing, patient. But you wouldn't have to think of it like that. You would just get a check every month, like clockwork, no stress, no worry. You could travel, you could relax. You would be completely taken care of. And you would have the peace of mind of knowing that the money, the family's legacy, is safe. He then delivered the final, killing blow, the line that was the culmination of 20 years of his own shame and condescension. He reached across the table and patted my hand, a gesture of profound, paternalistic dismissal. "Mom," he said, his voice full of a deep, pitying affection. "You've spent your life with books, not balance sheets. Let me handle this for you. It's the least I can do." The offer had been made. The insult had been delivered. My role as the naive, incompetent old woman was complete. And the stage was now perfectly set for my own, long overdue, and final performance. I looked at my son, at his handsome, earnest, and deeply fraudulent face. I looked at his wife, who was watching me with a hawk-like intensity, her expression a mixture of greed and a kind of triumphant pity. They were a perfect, predatory team. They had laid their trap with what they believed was a masterful subtlety. They had presented their insulting, parasitic offer as an act of love, and now, they were waiting for me to gratefully, tearfully, accept. I let the silence stretch. I looked down at the proposal in my hands, as if I were giving it a deep and serious consideration. I could feel their anticipation, a palpable, buzzing energy in the air between us. They were so close. They could already taste the victory. And then, I looked up. I did not look angry. I did not look hurt. I did not look insulted. I looked at my son, and I smiled. It was a small, serene, and deeply enigmatic smile. It was the smile of a librarian who has just found the perfect, obscure reference to win a long and tedious argument. "You're right, Derek," I said, my voice quiet, calm, and utterly, completely, agreeable. The effect of my simple agreement was instantaneous and profound. It was not the reaction they had prepared for. They had prepared for tears, for arguments, for a frightened, emotional negotiation. My calm, smiling acceptance of their premise threw them completely off balance. A look of surprised, triumphant relief washed over Derek's face. He had done it. It had been easier than he'd thought. He had won. "You are absolutely right," I continued, my smile never wavering. I tapped a finger on the $1 million figure at the top of their proposal. $1 million can disappear quickly if you're not careful. It's really just hobby money, isn't it? The words, so casual, so dismissive, so utterly out of character for the poor, simple woman they believed me to be, landed in the center of the table with the force of a dropped stone. The triumphant relief on Derek's face vanished, replaced by a look of profound, slack-jawed confusion. Kimberly's perfectly made-up face went blank. Hobby money? The phrase hung in the air between us, a dissonant, incomprehensible chord in the symphony of their perfect plan. They stared at me, their minds scrambling to process the data. $1 million, hobby money. The two concepts did not compute. I had not rejected their offer. I had not argued with their premise. I had simply, with a single, quiet sentence, completely and utterly obliterated the entire foundation upon which their condescending pitch was built. The power dynamic of the entire evening, of the past 20 years, had just, in that single, smiling moment, been reversed. They were no longer the wealthy, sophisticated benefactors, deigning to help their poor, simple mother. They were two confused, suddenly very small people, sitting opposite a woman who had just referred to a life-changing fortune as a casual pastime. The first reveal was complete, and the second, far more devastating one, was about to begin. The silence that followed my hobby money comment was a thing of beauty. It was a dense, heavy, and deeply uncomfortable silence, filled with the frantic, whirring sound of my children's brains, trying to recalibrate their entire understanding of the world. Derek found his voice first. It was a weak, sputtering thing. "Hobby money," he repeated, the words sounding absurd in his own mouth. "Mom, what are you talking about? It's $1 million. And..." "Yes, I know," I said, my voice still pleasant, still calm. I folded their ridiculous proposal and placed it neatly on the table beside my plate. And it's a lovely little bonus. I was thinking I might use it to redo the garden. I let that sink in. $1 million garden. Kimberly was staring at me, her mouth slightly agape, her carefully constructed mask of bored sophistication completely shattered. I think, I said, looking from my son's confused face to my daughter-in-law's shocked one, that there has been a rather significant misunderstanding, for a very long time. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. I was in no hurry. I had been waiting for this moment for 20 years. I was going to savor it. Derek, I said, my voice now taking on a new, quiet authority. You have spent the last 2 decades believing that I am a simple, struggling woman. You cut me out of your life because you were ashamed of my simple life. You believed I was a financial burden, a relic of a past you needed to escape. I paused. You were wrong, I said. On all counts. I then delivered the first, devastating truth. The lottery win was just that, a lucky, random event. It has nothing to do with my actual financial situation. My true net worth, I said, my voice as calm and steady as a surgeon announcing a diagnosis, is a result of 20 years of disciplined, private, and rather successful investing. While you were building your law career, I was building a portfolio. And while you weren't speaking to me, that portfolio was speaking volumes. I looked them both directly in the eye, and I gave them the number. As of the market close yesterday, I said, my personal, liquid net worth is a little over $7 million. The number, so much larger, so much more impossible than the one they had been fighting over, had the effect of a physical blow. Derek flinched as if he had been struck. Kimberly made a small, choking sound. $7 million. The entire premise of their evening, of their reunion, of their condescending, predatory concern, was a smoking ruin. They had not come to rescue a poor, naive lottery winner. They had come to try and swindle a secret, self-made multimillionaire. The shame, the humiliation, the sheer, staggering scale of their own miscalculation was written all over their faces. Derek's face, which had been so full of confident, paternalistic pride, was now a pale, sweaty mask of horror. He was not a savior. He was a fool. A greedy, grasping, and profoundly ignorant fool who had just revealed the depths of his own character to a woman he had just discovered was a financial titan. But I was not finished. The revelation of the money was only the first part of the lesson. The second part was about what I intended to do with it. Before either of them could recover from the shock of the $7 million revelation, before they could begin to formulate the desperate, groveling apologies that I knew were coming, I reached into my simple, sensible handbag. My movements were calm and unhurried. I pushed aside my wallet and my reading glasses, and my fingers closed around a thick, glossy, and very expensive-looking travel portfolio. I placed it on the table with a soft, definitive thud. The portfolio was from a high-end, luxury travel agency. On its cover, embossed in gold leaf, were the words, World Odyssey, a 6-month grand voyage. I opened the portfolio. Inside, nestled in a series of neat, organized pockets, were a collection of documents, a detailed, day-by-day itinerary, a stack of first-class airline tickets, and the booking confirmations for a penthouse suite on one of the world's most luxurious cruise ships. I turned the portfolio around so that they could see. You see, Derek, I said, my voice a quiet, conversational thing, as if we were discussing the weather. Your call, your sudden concern for my well-being after 20 years of silence, it was very clarifying for me. It made me realize that you were right, in a way. My life has been too simple, too quiet, too embarrassing for you. I tapped a finger on the glossy photograph of the cruise ship. So, I said, a small, genuine smile, finally touching my lips. I decided to make it a lot more interesting. I let them absorb the information. The first-class tickets to Sydney, Australia, where the cruise would begin. The 6-month itinerary, a journey that would take me to dozens of countries, from the temples of Kyoto to the fjords of Norway, from the beaches of Tahiti to the canals of Venice. The confirmation for the Royal Penthouse Suite, a space larger than my entire first floor, with its own private butler and wraparound terrace. This was not a vacation. This was a statement. It was a declaration of a new life, a life of unapologetic, self-earned luxury, a life that was the absolute antithesis of the quiet, frugal, and invisible existence they had relegated me to. "I leave in 2 weeks," I said. "My best friend, Ellie, is coming with me. We've been planning it for years, you know. In secret, it was our little retirement project." The cruelty of that last line, the idea that I had been living a secret, rich, and fulfilling life of plans and dreams, while they had believed me to be a lonely, pathetic old woman, was a special kind of poison. They stared at the documents, their faces a mixture of awe, envy, and a profound, dawning despair. They were not just looking at a trip. They were looking at a visual representation of the fortune they had just discovered. A fortune that was now, very clearly, being spent. They were watching their inheritance set sail, in first class, to the other side of the world. And I, the woman they had deemed too simple to manage $1 million, was the one who was going. The 1-2 punch of the $7 million revelation and the round-the-world cruise had left them speechless, stunned into a state of silent, impotent horror. They were no longer players in this game. They were spectators, watching a life they could have been a part of sail away over the horizon. But I had one final piece of business to conclude. The final, legal, and irrevocable codicil to my 20-year experiment. I looked at my son, at the man who had, just moments ago, been so confident, so condescending, so sure of his own superior intelligence. His face was a ruin. "And Derek," I said, my voice now losing its gentle conversational tone and taking on the hard, clear, and final authority of a judge delivering a sentence. "There is one last thing you need to know." I leaned forward, my eyes locking with his. "Since you made it so abundantly, so painfully clear 20 years ago that you wanted no part of me, or of my simple, embarrassing life, I have decided, in my final will, to honor that wish." I let the words hang in the air, their meaning slowly, terribly, dawning on him. "My best friend, Ellie, my lawyer, and I finalized the documents last week," I said. "It's a very simple will. It makes a few small bequests to old friends and distant relatives. But the bulk of my estate, whatever is left of it after I have seen the world and enjoyed the fruits of my own labor, will be left to a series of educational charities and library foundations." I paused, delivering the final, killing blow with a quiet, surgical precision. "I have, of course, mentioned you by name in the will, so that you cannot contest it by claiming you were accidentally omitted. I have left you nothing." The word, so small, so simple, so absolute, seemed to suck all the air from his side of the table. "Nothing. I plan on spending every last penny enjoying the world," I continued, my voice now a near whisper. "I plan on living a life so full, so interesting, and so gloriously self-indulgent that by the time I am done, there will be nothing left for you to fight over. But don't worry." I gave him a small, cold, and final smile. "I'll be sure to send you a postcard." I then gathered my handbag. The business of the evening was concluded, the lesson was complete. I had not raised my voice. I had not shed a tear. I had simply, calmly, and with a librarian's quiet precision, recatalogued my own life, and in doing so, had deaccessioned my own son. I stood up from the table. The movement was a signal, a final, definitive end to the proceedings. The silence from Derek and Kimberly was absolute. They were statues of shattered greed, frozen in the wreckage of their own failed con. "Well," I said, my voice now light, almost cheerful, "this has been a most illuminating evening. Thank you for the dinner, Derek." It was a lovely gesture. The polite, formal cruelty of that last sentence, the thanking him for the expensive meal he had intended as the setting for my financial fleecing, was the final, perfect footnote to my lecture. I turned and walked away from the table. I did not look back. I moved through the opulent, hushed restaurant with a new, unfamiliar sense of lightness, of freedom. The weight of my secret, the burden of my son's rejection, the long, lonely years of my experiment, it was all gone. I stepped out of the restaurant and into the cool, crisp air of Rittenhouse Square. The city lights glittered around me, no longer a world I was separate from, but a world of infinite, beautiful possibility. The story concludes 3 weeks later. I am not in my quiet row house in West Philadelphia. I am standing on the private terrace of my penthouse suite on the Queen Mary 2, a glass of champagne in my hand. Beside me is Ellie, her own face alight with a kind of fierce, triumphant joy. The ship's horn blows, a deep, resonant sound that vibrates through the deck. We are sailing out of Sydney Harbor, the iconic shape of the Opera House receding behind us. The sky is a brilliant, impossible blue, the sea a vast, welcoming expanse. To new horizons, Ellie says, raising her glass. To new horizons, I reply, my voice full of a peace and a happiness I had not felt in 20 years. I think, for a fleeting moment, of Derek, back in Philadelphia, in his world of quiet desperation and mounting debt. I picture him receiving a postcard, a beautiful, glossy image of a Tahitian sunset or a Venetian canal, with a simple, handwritten message on the back, having a wonderful time. Wish you were here. But the thought is a passing one. He is a character from a book I have already finished reading. I am the author of a new story now, a story of a woman who spent the first part of her life building a fortune in secret, and who will spend the second part of her life spending it, gloriously and completely, on herself. The librarian has finally and irrevocably decided to live in the travel section. And the world is waiting,